Welcome back to Spitballin Cards. In today's video, we're going to be talking about fantasy baseball and if it actually correlates to baseball card collecting. We're also going to be doing some would you rathers. So I want to introduce who's here today. My name is Scott. We also have Phil, Chris, and Jeff. Good to have you all here, and thanks for listening. So this topic's very straightforward. We have fantasy baseball. I think fantasy baseball is pretty awesome. You draft a roster of players, and certain players you might not expect to go number one overall, right? Trey Turner may be more valuable than other players simply because of the value of stolen bases. Evan Carter might be more valuable than other players because his on-base prowess. All those things can impact where a player goes in fantasy. Where baseball cards, you might look at it a little bit different, and you say, okay, this guy's on a Hall of Fame path. I really like him for the long run. Unless you're doing a keeper league, that doesn't quite work for baseball cards. So I want to talk to you all. Is there anything correlating between baseball cards and fantasy? Is there a chance that there is arbitrage opportunities in baseball cards that we can learn from fantasy? Or even, is there a world where fantasy can help you be more informed on which prospects, baseball cards you should target moving forward? So, Phil, I want to start with you on this. What are your thoughts on fantasy baseball and baseball cards?
Yeah, so I've been doing fantasy baseball for quite some time, since the '90s and late '90s when I got AOL for the first time, and I got back into cards around 2014. And what I wanted to do was apply some of what I learned in fantasy and take out like bigger bets, more concentrated bets on certain players, which is actually what drew me back into cards. And I learned right away that being like a fantasy player evaluator, and you have some people in your fantasy leagues that are better at constructing rosters and playing the waiver wire. I was always better at individual player evaluation, and I've had to kind of work on the other stuff around it. And with fantasy baseball, if you do auction drafts, you're usually spending roughly 30 to 40% of your budget on pitchers. In the hobby, most people are spending probably closer to 5%. If you look at just what they spend on, especially modern players, you're looking at right around 5%, hopefully, for pitchers, and not too much more than that, or else that's a ton of risk, in my opinion, to take on. Hopefully no more than 10%. This is an investment advice, by the way. So what that's doing is that creates like a big, if other people are doing something similar, which I believe they are, based on secondary resale prices of these pitchers versus the hitters, it's creating a big divide, right? Like Jose Fernandez, Taijuan Walker, Michael Wacha, some of the guys I was buying around that 2014, 2015 time period, like a lot could go wrong and did go wrong with those pitchers, right? Versus some other hitters that were equally established or had an equal amount of buzz at the time, which a lot of those guys faded as well. So I think like largely a lot of the stuff can translate. You're doing a lot of your analysis based off of projections, and statistics in fantasy often do translate to cards. Where it doesn't, or where it's a little different, is with fantasy, the most common format is 5x5, whether it's rotisserie or a head-to-head categories league. In 5x5, from an offensive standpoint, you're looking at RBI, runs, batting average, home runs, and steals. Now, 2 of those 5 categories, RBIs and runs, are no longer important anymore in real life with regards to MVP voting, in my opinion. I think Scott had to ask somebody, or somebody had to ask somebody else, like, how many runs did Mookie Betts or Acuna have last year? Because we didn't know. And it was like, that much, really? It's because it doesn't matter for MVP. It doesn't matter for WAR at all. Literally, it doesn't matter for WAR. So, like, being on a team that scores a lot of runs from an offensive standpoint helps you more in fantasy than it would in real life card investing. Now, there's some nuance there where it does help be part of a team that's winning a lot. There's a lot of benefits to that. And often those are the teams that have good markets, fan bases, which helps a little bit, especially if it's the Yankees or Dodgers. So it's not completely something that you don't want to pay attention to. But you can get a guy with an 8 or 9 WAR on a team that doesn't score a lot of runs. Another reason why it's a little bit different is stolen bases, which Scott brought up. If you don't have like a 75 or 80% success rate stealing, like that's bad for your WAR contribution, right? That doesn't hurt you so much in fantasy. It might hurt your runs, which is another category, but having a lot of stolen bases, you're just looking at that one number. One of the biggest things has to do with position scarcity. So in fantasy, it used to be a thing where like, oh, get your second baseman and shortstops early in the draft, like really bump up Chase Utley is like a top 5, top 6 pick, just because after him, there's a big drop off. Now that's not as much of a thing. There's a lot of second basemen. Shortstop is one of the most deep positions, actually. It used to be that first base had all of like the talent and, maybe outfield. And third base used to be really deep, which is not as much anymore, which is a separate story. But in fantasy baseball, you're taking DHs in first baseman in the top like 15 to 20 picks, like guys like Vlad, Matt Olson, Yordan Alvarez, guys that don't really, you're not paying attention to their defense, right? Defense is a big component of WAR. So in the hobby, you have to pay attention to the position more than you would in fantasy. You have to make sure, it helps you even more if you play certain positions rather than others. Like with Fangraphs, center field gives you more credit than left field or right field. Second base and third base gets you more credit than first base. Shortstop gets you more credit than the other infield positions. Catcher gives you the most credit. That's just Fangraphs. Baseball Reference has a different formula, but it's just a different game in fantasy versus the hobby in a lot of cases.
And I will say, both of these correlate to real on-field value. When we're mentioning WAR versus and runs scored, in the hobby versus in actual fantasy, I feel like actual performance and importance on the field correlates more to sports cards. Wouldn't you agree with that? Because stolen bases, if someone has 50 stolen bases, you're not going to be paying a huge premium for that necessarily. If you're a GM, like maybe a little bit, but it's not a huge deal. And so that's one thing that's been hard for me as a non-fantasy player is I don't care about that as much, right? I just want the best player putting up the best stats, most impactful, has a Hall of Fame track, but in fantasy, it's a little bit different, which is interesting. Chris, Jeff, what do you think?
I'll let Jeff go ahead. I think he's got a fantasy draft, so he's probably got some thoughts on this.
I do. I have a fantasy draft in a couple hours. I want to just first say that at no point did I have to look up how many runs Acuna scored last year. I have 149 tattooed on my ass, and hopefully it'll be 153 will be tattooed right under it. But one thing Jeff and I learned is that if there's a player who's really valuable in fantasy and his cards seem like they're really undervalued, don't think that that's going to correct, because that exists for a reason. And Kyle Tucker is someone that Jeff and I spent several springs being like, this is the year. Like, he's a top 10 pick. Again, he does everything really, really well. But the hobby does not care. They just straight up do not care. They don't really care about Trey Turner either. For whatever reason, the hobby at large cared briefly when he signed with Philly, but really not since. So I think there's definitely just some danger, some potential danger there when you look at like Billy Hamilton 10 years ago was really popular in fantasy. But I hope you guys didn't buy any of his cards, although Jeff and I did recently buy a Billy Hamilton card, but that's a separate problem that we have. Same thing with, is it Estuary Ruiz? Am I saying that?
The new guy, the new Billy Hamilton.
Yeah.
He actually has something. He might be able to be a good offensive player, though.
In the minor leagues, it'll be for Oakland, so no one's going to care.
He could be. I'm just trying to be optimistic for A's fans. As a Rockies fan, we all need some hope in our lives. Okay, keep going. Sorry.
All right, Jeff, take it from there.
Yeah, definitely be careful because, as Chris said, fantasy results do not always equal card results. One thing that affects both fantasy and cards is hype. And I know Phil's talked about this a lot before when we were talking about which Jackson's the best Jackson to invest in card-wise, Holiday or Churio. There's an element of flash that really catches people that like to invest in cards, that catches their attention. And that doesn't necessarily equate to fantasy. What's interesting, a guy like Ellie De La Cruz, who projects to be a pretty solid fantasy player because he can fill up all the categories, all the necessary categories. But there's an interesting discussion about him, whether he's being overvalued, he's being drafted too high, he's being drafted way higher than, for my taste, I would take him. But it's a similar discussion about his cards. Are his cards overvalued? But he also brings that excitement to the field. So while he may not have the exact results you want, he brings that excitement, and that brings attention to him. So there's sometimes a correlation between the two, being fantasy good and being hobby good, but it's not always there. So I would just caution people that only play fantasy, that are looking to get into cards, to be careful with that.
Yeah, the stolen base guys that you had mentioned, Billy Hamilton and Ruiz, the points format for fantasy try to correct that. So like the category needs that you have to kind of spread that around with like a 5x5 format with points, you would just go for like the best player, which would also de-emphasize steals. So the need to get a guy that steals 80. And that was also during a time where stolen bases were not as plentiful as they are today.
Definitely.
So that in itself, like Billy Hamilton was probably one of the biggest like discrepancies just based on that and how he contributed, right?
Yeah.
And how 5x5 wasn't at the time very indicative of a player's true value, which I think is a lot of reason why people like me and others have gone to the points format, because we want to like actually bump up players that are actually good in our heads. One other thing, so like Kyle Tucker is interesting. So, and this is another thing that's different, is like the narrative matters more in sports cards. Like Juan Soto wins the MVP this year, you might win your fantasy league. His cards might only go up by 30-40% just because there's a lot of speculators holding his cards that are looking for a chance to exit. So
yeah, look at Acuna from last year. Hardly moved at all.
Exactly. So the statistics are the statistics, and you get rewarded for them, and you're guaranteed to get rewarded in fantasy. Where in real life, you've got things like Acuna, Soto. You've also got situations where, I mean, it's a market. So Mike Trout, his cards actually went up in January 2021 after he had a so-so season. He didn't finish top 3 in MVP. His cards still went up in January because that was a flight to safety. A lot of people have been burnt, in my opinion, investing in high-end football and basketball cards. So you saw a bump up for Trout in January, off season, right? And you saw the same thing, I think, in 2020 and in 2019, where people kind of moved money into Trout because they got burnt on prospects or whatever. Now, age is important in both, but I think it's actually a little bit more obsessed over in cards. So the fact that J-Rod is, how old is he now? 23?
23. This is age 23 season.
Yeah. If you're in a dynasty league, so where you're actually holding, like keeping your roster each year for the most part. So like, you know, it's important to have a young player and you're looking out 5 to 10 years from now. I think the difference of J-Rod, say if he was 25 instead of 23, I don't think it would matter as much in fantasy. In cards, J-Rod is 25 now with his current contributions and trajectory. I think he'd probably be quite a bit cheaper, but in fantasy, maybe not so much.
Yeah,
I would definitely agree with that. Yeah.
Can I say one thing on Ashuri Ruiz real quick? I looked up his baseball reference page.
Yeah, what's his quality contact?
No, this is baseball reference. This is not baseball
hard hit percentage.
In AA in 2022, he had 49 games. He hit 344 with a 1.085 OPS.
Yeah.
With 37 stolen bases. In AAA, that same year, he had a 315 batting average and a 935 OPS. And for that full year, 114 games between Double and AAA, he had 16 home runs, 85 stolen bases with a 332 batting average, 974 OPS. So there is hope for him. If that translates, I have no idea if it will. I have not watched him one.
He might not even get to start the whole season. We'll see.
It's a beautiful baseball reference page for his minor leagues, especially with his speed. If he gets his on base to around 400, he's going to have over 100 steals this year.
Oh, yeah. If he gets it around 340, 345, he'll probably have close to that.
I'm saying that year, he had a 447 OBP, which is insane.
That's got to be like the Pacific Coast League, right? Like one of those minor leagues that's super hitter friendly.
Do you guys remember Dallas McPherson?
It is the Pacific Coast
Didn't he
League.
tear up that league? Remember him a long time ago? Angels.
I think Joe Adele has ripped that league apart as well. I mean,
so Texas League for AA, PCL for AAA.
Okay.
But anyways, I'm just really hoping for A's fans they can.
If he doesn't start on that team, then does that bode well for him, or does that mean he's undervalued?
No, that's not good. That's not good. Fantasy or baseball cards, not good. Yeah, bad time.
He started to lose a lot of his at bats in the second half. I noticed.
Yes.
I had him in a fantasy league. So
I wonder what his splits are.
Yeah, it's just his
the answer is not worth looking into.
They're not that bad. That's okay. His homer away, he was way better on the road. No, way better at home. The Coliseum did hit well. And righties versus lefties, 734 OPS versus lefties. Just keep him, platoon him, right? Well, there's not many lefties in the league, but either way, anyway.
And he maybe hit 180 in the second half.
Yeah. Unless we're putting Ruiz on our thumbnail, we should probably move on.
He actually had equal first and second half splits. Actually, he was better in the second half. 635 OPS versus a 640 OPS. So.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna edit that out.
I'm really hoping for this guy for some reason. So, all righty. So
just because I shit on him, that makes you really like him. I think there's definitely
Just so you know, anybody that Chris has on his fantasy league, you probably should sell all of their cards immediately because
Absolutely,
they all just get hurt. Every single one of them. Can you give us a few examples, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. So last year, my biggest fantasy move was I gave up my first round pick this year to acquire Max Fried, who pitched 5 innings on my team and then suffered a forearm strain and didn't come back till I was eliminated from the playoffs. So Max Fried, bad. Yuri Perez, I have now officially kept on 2 teams. And well, you can see how that's going. He's getting his elbow imaged. You know, whenever the Marlins are able to get him into, you know, a regular like public ER, because they're not going to pay for their own MRI machine for sure. But yeah, basically, if you hear Jeff and I talk about, well, not Jeff, if you hear me talk about a player that's on my fantasy team, get rid of that player's cards like immediately. For example, I've never owned Freddie Freeman in a fantasy league. No one will ever trade him to me. They just like to keep him from me. Especially like in Jeff's auction league last year, some idiot bid me up to like $68. So I couldn't have Freddie Freeman on my team. I was very annoyed. And of course, he
probably kept him healthy.
Yeah, that kept him healthy. You're right. I should just try to avoid him.
That's really funny. But yeah, okay. So let's talk about prospects in fantasy. I don't do much fantasy just because I don't have any friends. I'm just kidding. I don't have the attention span for it. But with prospects, I feel like there's a huge premium. Obviously, in keeper leagues, there is because you keep them. So you kind of can claim them. I don't know how that works, but that's a thing. But with regular drafts, is there an opportunity to recognize talent with prospects to correlate to cards? Is there anything there whatsoever? Or are they overbaked, overhyped in both leagues, in the actual fantasy and in sports cards?
Yeah, I don't know until they start playing, right?
I think Scott, you're when you were talking offline, you were thinking like, has fantasy ruined prospecting because now, or does it give opportunity? I think fantasy came, I wouldn't say first, because people could argue in the comments like Tonvad Popple, you know, he was hyped, and Greg Jeffries, they were hyped long before fantasy was available to a lot of people, especially on the internet. But then people probably did fantasy back in the 80s and just did it their own kind of, you know, old-fashioned way. So what I will say, though, is that fantasy was around before prospecting got out of control with regards to the over availability of information and everybody trying to find the next Trout. And whether it started with Trout or with somebody else, I don't know. But I think in 2014, it was much easier to buy low-end prospects that were, say, like top 50 prospects on a budget than today. And I think a lot of that has to do with just more people kind of driving up the prices because they're all doing the same thing. And the amount of information that's available has, again, increased. Fangraphs, StatCast data wasn't around in 2014, right? Fangraphs was around, but the data set was much more limited. The quality of contact stuff wasn't really around much. I know for pitchers, I was mainly looking at the time, like K to walk ratios, not so much into like, you know, vertical movement, horizontal movement, release points, extensions. You know, the amount of pitching data on Fangraphs is insane. And maybe that was there back then, but I feel like nowadays we have more useful stats than just like BABIP and contact rates. And I think a lot of people are trying to take advantage of that. You know, I think in baseball, like as a sport, interest has gone down, but in the information itself, which I actually do like the way that the sport is heading in that regard with more advanced stats, because I think that makes it interesting to a broader group of people. You know, stat geeks can look at baseball in different ways that they can't apply those methods to other sports, at least not right now.
Yeah.
I also think I'd say there's definitely more fantasy baseball players than there are baseball card collectors. I could be wrong, but that feels like that number's right. So it's possible that your first window into some of these prospects would be from reading fantasy baseball articles versus baseball card articles. There's certainly going to be a lot more fantasy information out there. So if you check like drafts starting in like late January, early February, you might get maybe a step up on what prospects are already being hyped before spring training opens based on where they're getting picked in fantasy drafts. Could possibly get slightly ahead of the curve that way. I don't know.
Okay.
That's true.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up fantasy baseball cards. If there's anything, I think the general consensus is not really, because fantasy is so focused on a few random stats And on top of that, it's like seasonal. So, but Jeff, I think you had a would you rather that kind of correlates to this conversation.
I did, and we've already brought up these players. There's two guys who have been very good fantasy players, and I just wanted to throw it to you guys. If somebody said you had to spend $1,000 on these players' cards, which one would you pick and why? And the players we've talked about before are Kyle Tucker, who's a consensus top 10 pick and a little bit younger, and also Trey Turner, who has been a fantasy darling. And despite all those smooth slides into home, he really hasn't captured the hobby's heart. So if you would have to pick between those guys to spend $1,000 on, who would you take and why?
That's a great question.
All right. I will say it's Sunday, March 17th. If I had to do this today, I would say Trey Turner because I feel like Kyle Tucker has been consistently great and no one cares. So I don't know what he'd have to do to move the needle. I think a lot of collectors just have written off Houston to the point where it doesn't matter. So I don't know. Plus his lack of a chin is just discouraging. So I would say Trey Turner because I do feel like his really crappy first 4 months in Philly damaged his card market. And that's a very exciting team with a big market. And if he has a huge bounce back season, I could see his cards really taking a bigger jump than Kyle Tucker's. So I'm going to say Trey Turner.
I would probably take Kyle Tucker, actually. Obviously, he's not the Houston Astros I'd invest in. I'd probably go to Jordan and Altuve. Yeah, those are the guys. I would buy Altuve first because I'm a sucker for old people in the league that have careers. That's more of my. I love Paul Goldschmidt, right? Who else likes Paul Goldschmidt? But Kyle Tucker, I think, has such an interesting ceiling. I don't want to say it's higher than Trey Turner's because Trey Turner has the highest sprint speed in baseball and he's had some great offensive years. But I do think Kyle Tucker is a 5-tool player. If it all just clicks one year and he just hits his ceiling on each of those 5 tools, because he's a better defender than Trey Turner, in my opinion. And he has a higher offensive profile than Trey Turner. And he's 26, 27, while Trey Turner's in his 30s. All of those make Kyle Tucker, at least for me, there's a path to making money on Kyle Tucker, in my opinion. The issue with Kyle Tucker is a lot of cards, right? He has a lot of cards. And that's where Trey Turner from 2016 there's a lot less. And that's interesting. But depends on what I could buy with $1,000. Like, what's the Bowman Chrome pricing, right? If they were all equal, I'd probably take Kyle Tucker. If Kyle Tucker is more than Trey Turner, I'd take Trey Turner. So,
yeah, I think it's funny. I know we just wrapped up our fantasy segment, but both of these guys are better in fantasy than in real life, and part of that reason is because of low walk rates, which tends to not hurt you as much in fantasy unless you play with OVP or you're in a points league. So that's why I don't love these guys all too much. It's funny. I actually spoke to somebody at the card show I was at Best Flippin' over the weekend in Woburn, Massachusetts, and he had said that he just auctioned a Kyle Tucker Bowman Chrome Auto Orange. I think it was a VGS 9.5, and it went for under comps, under the one before it, under the one that went after it, but it went for under $2,000, which seems like a pretty good deal. With Trey Turner, he's a guy I would pick in the short term for like 1 year. I do like Kyle Tucker for the most part, though. I think Trey Turner is an interesting story there. He's a big reason why the Phillies, went on that run. He's a big part of them. That market is kind of on the upswing if we're to look at like team markets. So Trey Turner for the 1 year and probably Kyle Tucker for the 5 to 10 year. For what Scott said, like maybe we haven't even seen his ceiling yet. We kind of know who Trey Turner is at this point.
Can I just say one thing that might kind of shock you? Maybe it doesn't because you know these stats. Kyle Tucker and Trey Turner both had the same amount of stolen bases last year, 30. And Trey Tucker, they're one person now. Kyle Tucker, that's not like his most important part of his game. That's like a main reason you're looking at Trey Turner. It's like, oh, he's so fast. But with the way his team's set up, it's not a huge tool that's leveraged yet. He had a 320 OBP last year. His career average is 350. So that hurts, and that's probably why. But with Kyle Tucker, he had a 142 OPS plus last year. Turner's career high was, in a full season, 145 in 2021. But I'm just saying, I think that Trey Turner, if you put up a 160 OPS plus and 7 WAR, it wouldn't surprise me. So that's why it's
interesting. I was leaning towards Kyle Tucker primarily because of his age. I feel like we have more of an opportunity to see him do some great things. But yeah, I like what both Phil and Chris said about the short term. Trey Turner feels like there could be more movement in the short term. Kyle Tucker's cards haven't moved in the several years that he's been a huge fantasy asset. And I think he's overshadowed a little bit by some of the other bigger personalities and more flashier players, I should say, on the Astros. So long term, if somebody said I've got to put $1,000 in, I would take Tucker. But you guys made a good point about the short term, where you could see some return in Turner's cards, because that's going to be an exciting team to watch, and he could really, especially if they run him a little more. I don't know how possible that'll be if he's still running behind Schwarber on the bases, but yeah, I could see him stealing 50 bags and getting back into the fantasy MVP conversation, and maybe his card would get some leverage.
So interesting thing about Trey Turner and Kyle Tucker, both average 5.3 WAR for every 162 games played. So realistically, they're going to end up being the same player in different, right? They derive value slightly differently. Kyle Tucker does it on offense and defense. Trey Turner does it on offense and base running. So it's just interesting because Trey Turner, excellent base runner outside of just stolen bases. He can take the extra bag. Obviously, he's so fast and he has great routes. There's a lot of things about that make him valuable. So great. Would you rather, Jeff? I loved it.
Kyle Tucker also hits lefties pretty well.
Yeah.
They both have the equal, I feel like, probability of being player of the week. They have similar season by season ceilings and floors. So I'm not surprised at all when you said Scott, the 5.3 WAR.
Exactly the same.
Pretty much the same guy.
So they haven't locked him up yet, have they? For Kyle Tucker?
No, they have not.
And
Kyle Tucker does also it's a smaller sample size, but his postseason performances have not been good.
Yeah.
I know Trey Turner has also had issues with that, especially with the Dodgers, but
what do you
in the spotlight and not really drawing attention.
What do you think of Willie Mays or Jackie Robinson?
In general, as people?
Yeah. What do you think of them as baseball
superior baseball players to Kyle Tucker?
What if I told you Kyle Tucker has better postseason stats than both of those players? It just shows that they don't really matter in the long run.
Yeah, I would be
except for Mookie when we're trying to knock him down.
Yeah, only if you need to knock Mookie down. But Mookie has a 710 OPS. Willie Mays is at 650. Jackie Robinson's at 400. But it doesn't really, they don't talk about it. These players right now in the moment, it can hype up cards if they do something good in the postseason. But for their legacy, it's amazing how much it doesn't correlate, because Willie Mays, he did not do anything.
No, but that might also change now because so many more people make the playoffs.
Right.
Yeah, but still, he had a lot of at-bats in the postseason, I believe. I'll go look real quick and double check.
Has he had more than Kyle Tucker?
Willie Mays had 33 games, which isn't a huge sample, but that's a decent size. 668 OPS with 1 home run in 33 games. 248.
I bet Kyle Tucker's played more games than that already.
Kyle Tucker's played 62 postseason games.
What's his OPS and everything?
His OPS is 704. He's hit 237. In his last 4 playoff series, he has not hit above 190.
So he's young enough, though, where if he has one good postseason, Bryce Harper did the same thing. His postseason stats with Washington weren't good. And they went to Phillies, and all of a sudden we view him as a postseason darling. It can change.
Yeah, but Tucker has a million games.
That's true.
62 games, a lot of games.
My point is, I'm not sure how much I think that correlates to pricing for more than.
No, I'm just throwing it out. 62 games is pretty much what Mike Trout's played every year for the last 5 seasons. It's a lot of games.
Yeah.
On the topic of trash can bangers, which Kyle Tucker was not a part of, but Alex Bregman and Carlos Correa were. Of those two former teammates, who would you choose?
Oh, that's a good question.
So, Phil, this is definitely a gun to our head type scenario, right?
Yeah. Okay. So with Trey Turner and Kyle Tucker, I would say neither. I've actually told people in the past that with Kyle Tucker versus Yordan Alvarez, so I group Devers, Devers is going to catch some bullets here. I group Devers and Tucker together in the way that they're both very consistent, and that if you put money in them, you're going to lose by way of slow bleed. Where with Yordan Alvarez, at least you're going to get some spikes, some top moments from him where you can get out at a higher price than what you paid potentially. Not always. This is an investment advice. So you have to pick one, yes, with Bregman versus Correa. The answer can't be neither because, obviously it's neither, So
also with Yordan, what's David Ortiz advanced metrics, right? He has 55 WAR. That's kind of the benchmark now for a premier DH. Jordan could get there. There's a chance.
Yeah.
Not likely, but that helps him. But anyway, so I have these two side by side, and I will share this while we talk about them. Okay, Chris, Jeff, you go first. But here are the two players. It's surprisingly close.
Yeah, it is surprisingly close. Can we get their ages while you're there?
Gray is 29. Bregman, I think, is 30 or 31. I'll check, though, for sure.
I expect a big bounce back from Correa this year. So if I'm putting money, I would probably do that. I feel like he's closer on a Hall of Fame trajectory. Possibility. It's interesting looking at these stats right next to each other. The OPS plus is pretty impressive for Bregman. It's just, yeah, I don't know. He's been overshadowed. I would buy into Correa. If I had to do it, I would buy into Correa.
What if I told you they're basically exactly the same age? They're both 29 right now. The way that Major League Baseball service time, so like it will say age 29 for Correa this year and age 30 for Bregman this year, because I think it's after this All-Star break or right around July is when they designate if it's your age whatever season. So they're the exact same age. Basically exactly the same. A few months
I do have to say it's kind of shocking to me that Correa only has 33 stolen bases. I didn't realize his career total was that low.
It's that half. You can't do it. I'm also surprised that the OPS metric is significantly higher for Bregman versus Correa. It's tough.
Yeah, I mean, these two guys, I would lean Correa too, just because I think, I mean, as a shortstop, there probably is a outside like Hall of Fame track for him. I know Bregman's had his last couple of years have not been great. This is his walk year, right? For Bregman?
I don't know. I know he signed a contract a few years ago. We can look real quick.
I don't think he's been extended or anything. So I know there was even some like
where's his salary? It's somewhere on
at the top, I think. But yeah, I would probably go Correa.
Bregman came pretty close to winning that MVP.
He did. He had a huge year.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Trout's injury almost.
Second to Trout, right?
Yeah.
But 2019 was also the year of the rabid ball, which is it his only year with over 30 home runs? No, he's got a 31, and then he has a 41. So, I guess I'd say Correa, but I wouldn't be surprised at all. Like if it ended up being Bregman with like the higher career WAR at the end of things. I mean, a lot of it's going to come down to health, and aging curves. Like Correa's been really banged up lately. Bregman's had some injury issues, although he was very healthy last year. This is another example of why like fantasy and real life card investing doesn't always go hand in hand, because in fantasy, the answer is super clear for the short term in Bregman. Guy's going to give you a pretty good batting average, over 20 home runs. He's going to help you in those other stats, where with Correa, you don't really know what you're going to get at all, even if he stays healthy. Just underwhelming steals, probably underwhelming power. Batting average, who the hell knows? That probably fluctuates a lot with him. So that OPS advantage seemed to be half through slugging and half through OBP, like 20 points of each made up that 40-point-ish OPS difference between Bregman and Correa.
The issue is Correa is just less consistent, and obviously two different major teams signed him and then dropped him in physicals, in the Giants and the Mets. And then the Twins, oh my gosh, look at that. He led the league with 30 double plays grounded into last year. That's horrible. I bet that was terrible to watch as a Twins fan.
Run. Yeah.
Holy crap. So just the health part kind of makes me actually lean Bregman. There's a lot of things with Bregman that look pretty good. Realistically, I think Bregman's Hall of Fame odds right now actually have a decent shot. Like I could see him putting up 30 WAR in his 30s, like 20 to 30 WAR. And that puts him at 55 to 65 WAR. Like, it's tough. I just don't know if Correa has anything in the tank left with who he's become. Do we think he's going to heal and be better? Maybe. It's tough. I wouldn't want to buy either, but I might pick Bregman at this point.
What's the Fangraphs WAR difference? I'm pulling up Bregman now. Bregman has 35.2.
Bregman's is fine. I think Correa's is significantly lower.
Yeah, because of that defense.
Correa's at 32. Yeah, it's a huge drop. So I'm taking Bregman personally. We can look at Zips down here. So Zips is 3 years. They actually have Correa projecting for 4 WAR this year, and I don't know if that's real. But basically 7, 13. What is this? 11 WAR is kind of what they're going to say in the next 3 years. So that'd put him at 43 F WAR. And if he did 11 WAR for Correa here, that'd put him at 51. Interesting to look at, but I don't know. Neither player makes me happy, but I'd probably take Bregman personally.
Yeah. Did we find that is Bregman? Is this his walk year? Did we look that up?
Oh, I need to find that out. I got distracted.
More
So
of a
Phil, who
fantasy.
did you take?
Well, after all that,
Hmm.
I was leaning Correa, but then I'm thinking like, but Bregman's not even the injury prone guy anymore. It's Correa, and like, I don't know, like, could I really bank on even like Correa for 1 year to show me anything significantly better than what he's shown over the last couple? And I think we talked about this in a recent episode. Like, how much of this is regret? Oh, no, it is his contract year for Bregman.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So how much have we seen from Correa that is like actual, like real regression versus injury related, just bad performance? I don't know, but there's a good chance one of these guys makes it into the Hall of Fame if they can look past the scandal.
So one thing I'll say about Bregman, and so I have 2 points about the cheating scandal to look at here. And so right here we can see his age 23, his first year to age 25, those 3 years, he was a 147 OPS plus guy. The cheating scandal came out in the fall of 2019. If we go from 2020 to 2023, he is now a 123 OPS plus guy. So if we are assuming there was still cheating going on past 2017, which there's no proof, but if we assume, then it shows if there's not cheating, he's not as good offensively, plain and simple. Like, that's kind of worrisome to me. But at the same time, during that time frame, like you can even see, like, if we look at WAR for those years, there's those first 4 years, 22 WAR, and then the next 4 was, come on, it's like what, 12 WAR. So depends if you think cheating continued past 2017. If you do, then I would not touch him. If you don't, then I think that he's a decent target in some ways, actually.
If you look at the splits of 2017, a few of those guys actually did better on the road, which is just like so weird to think about. And I don't know if Bregman was one of them.
Yeah, he was. He was way better on the road. And I also will say Bregman was a rookie that year. That was his first full season. It's hard for it to really hold that against him compared to other players. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm trying to be an apologist for Alex Bregman, and I shouldn't be. But my point is, he was a rookie 2017. It's hard to really hold him as accountable to me compared to Carlos Beltran, who was the ringleader of the whole thing, right? So, yeah. But if Beltran gets in the Hall of Fame, then I think Bregman and Altuve have no issues if they have the stats to get there.
Yeah, Beltran will be the measuring stick to see if people are going to hold it against him.
And if you disagree with me, please don't yell at me in the comments. That's totally fine. I'm just looking at voter preferences, not because I might feel a specific way.
There's actually just a specific card I want to talk about very briefly that ended on eBay a couple weeks ago. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. And I want your guys' opinion on this card. So this is Juan Soto's 2024 Top Series 1. I'm not sure what they're calling this. Is it an Ultra SP, an SS SP, whatever it is. It's going to be his first flagship card. It's hard to say in a Yankee uniform, but as a Yankee, we'll say.
Okay.
So I want you guys to tell me what you think this card went for. Take a guess. It was up for bids. And then I want to see if this is a card you would be a buyer at that price, or if you'd rather put your money in a different Soto.
So these were the super, super, super short prints they kind of threw in at the last minute and didn't really tell us about till the last minute of Juan Soto and Shohei Ohtani airbrushed in their new uniforms. And I know they've been going for a lot. So I didn't see what this one went for. I don't know if that's part of the would you rather, but I would probably rather have any other Juan Soto. So
yeah, I mean, I'll tell you. So this went up for bids at $511. Is the last one that I saw finish. So for around that price, you could spend a little bit more and get a hands-on hips PSA 10, or several other. My issue with this card is that it's obviously very photoshopped, which was one of the things I'm hesitant. I'm just waiting. I feel like in Series 2 we'll get a real Soto in a Yankees uniform card, and I'm afraid that will crush the value of this card.
Yeah, it'll
So
look great. Or what about the black parallel, the first Soto black parallel? That's going to look great. And I think people want that and forget about this one.
Anyway, Phil and Scotty, what do you guys think?
So Photoshop is interesting. Bowman Chrome autographs, Bowman Chrome first, they're all Photoshopped. Every single one of them, at least 90% of them. There's some that might not be. On top of that, you'd be surprised at how many of our cards are already Photoshopped and we just don't realize it because we don't dive into the photography of the card. Not saying I'd buy this card necessarily, but I don't hate it as much as you guys do. Would I buy this? No. But if there's only, I don't know how many they made, 10 or 15. I don't know if it's that low. That's pretty cool, right? His first, like if he becomes a Yankee forever, maybe that has a place with the Yankees. Who knows? But it's not as big of a deal to me just because in 20 years, will we even remember if it's Photoshopped? We'll just say it's the cool super short print that was in the set. And maybe there's a pathway to collection there. But yeah, not really my card, regardless if it was or wasn't Photoshopped.
Phil, what do you think?
Yeah, I think a few of you guys covered it. Let's not make the same mistake as a lot of people did with the Series 2 short print of J-Rod.
I agree.
And
that was
we don't know what else is coming in the way of short prints or rookies related to J-Rod. We also don't know what's coming in the way of first-year Yankees cards of Soto. On the surface, it looks cool. I can look past the airbrushing. Cool card, cool image. It's limited. I don't know how much. Probably less limited than we all think right now because that's the way it usually works.
Yeah.
But I'm not buying this. I can't. Even if I'm a Yankee fan, it would be an impulse buy, an emotionally driven buy, and those ones don't usually tend to hold up too well.
Very true.
And,
all right. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with hockey cards at all, but there's a 1988 Topps Wayne Gretzky. It's one of his most popular cards besides his really early stuff, where he had just been traded to the Kings, and it's him holding up at the press conference. He's holding up his brand new LA Kings hockey jersey. If that were the image, it was like from his press conference, and Soto and Ohtani has one too, they're holding up their new jerseys. Would you like the card more or less?
I know you would like it more.
I would definitely.
That is in your vein of collecting. It'd be cooler, but I still wouldn't buy it myself.
Okay. But cooler, you said?
It would be cooler. Yeah,
okay.
Definitely. But speaking of Photoshopped in 80s cards, think about the Ken Griffey Jr. That card's technically Photoshopped, and that card has a lot of legs. Obviously, that's the most cherry-picked example in the world. I know that, so don't get mad at me. That is a different era, but I'm just saying, sometimes you can look over it, and sometimes history makes you go back and look at it differently than you do in the present. So,
yeah, fair enough. Yes, I did want to do a quick Instagram shout out to an Instagram account called BGZ Slabs. He recently finished a Yordan Alvarez superfractor collection that I was extremely impressed with. So he has 4 Stadium Club superfractors of Yordan Alvarez, Stadium Club Chromes, actually. He has the Chrome Insert Superfractor, the Chrome Insert Auto Superfractor, then the Stadium Club Standalone Set Superfractor, and he very recently was able to track down the Stadium Club Chrome Standalone Set Auto Superfractor.
that's really cool.
So it's just these 4 cards, seeing them all together is just spectacular. I have actually gone back and looked at this picture a few times. I think it's pretty cool.
It's really cool. It's very impressive. Out of which image do you prefer? If you had to pick one.
Oh, the top one. The Chrome Standalone Set that's his best looking rookie card by far, in my opinion.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah, I agree.
Congrats to him. That's awesome. So,
yeah. Just minor nitpick. They really should have these guys sign the Chrome Insert Superfractors. They should sign them on card.
Yeah. I don't get why that's not a thing. Why it's only 1 card extra. Toss that into a different thing. And maybe just because of them, they print it. It doesn't quite make sense, but I agree with you.
But
awesome. I think that's a great place to wrap up. Thank you for watching, everybody. Please let us know in the comments down below if you agreed with our takes, hated our takes. We're talking about a lot of controversial stuff with the Astros, so please don't be mad at us. Other than that, we'll see you in the next video.